Hello and welcome again to another edition of Career Magic. My name is Nitin Kulkarni and I'm back again with another episode, the second episode in the series of very important series on stress and resilience. Now, when I used to, not that long ago, when I used to think about stress, I knew that stress is not good. But when I thought about stress, I really thought about it in very vague terms, in terms of, okay, stress, gets you down mentally and therefore it reduces your efficiency and therefore it is not very good for you. Now, I didn't really know about the horrendous effects that prolonged or chronic stress has on our body physically. What it does to the inside of our body, what it does to our very important organ systems, and how it deteriorates our health over a period of time, and therefore we contract these what are known as the lifestyle diseases and worse. So that's why I decided to do this series to talk about my experiences and what I have learned over the years about stress and what I have done about it. Now, in the first episode, I talked about how our body is designed and why chronic stress is harmful to us. So, our body, the stress response system in our bodies, which prepares us for a fight or flight response, is designed to be a very quick solution to acute physical distress. And so I gave the example of a deer in a forest being chased by a predator, needing a large burst of energy to escape, to run away and escape, or to fight the predator. And that is accomplished by our stress response system, which is designed quite beautifully to take care of those kinds of eventualities. However, as I said last time, the modern day stresses have changed. They have become more psychological and social stressors, and these turn on the same stress response system. However, they last for long periods of time. They are not the acute physical emergencies that I just described. And therefore, when the stress response system is turned on for long periods of time, it does the things that it is supposed to do, and those turn out to be very harmful for us. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about some of those effects that happen to us as a result of this prolonged switching on of the stress response system. Now, the stress response system basically it operates through some hormones. Two of them are cortisol and adrenaline, and when they are secreted, they bring about some rapid changes in the body. So, I'm going to describe 5 harmful effects of this system when it is turned on for long periods of time. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. So, I'm going to go over these at a fairly high level. I'm going to maybe use a few medical terms like names of hormones, etc. But it is really not an in-depth analysis of what happens. You can talk to a medical practitioner or read this wonderful book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Sapolsky, and it describes a lot of these things in much more detail. So the first effect that I'm going to talk about is the effect on sleep. Now, we all know that getting good sleep is really important for us. When we sleep, if we sleep well and for enough duration, that is the time when our body rejuvenates. That is when the body repairs itself, gets rest, and does a lot of the re-energizing. And so what happens as a result of the stress response? Well, before I get into that, the hormone cortisol that I talked about earlier, in normal times, let's say you're not stressed, in normal times, the level of cortisol in our bloodstream varies during the day. There is a little bit of cortisol in our system in any case, whether there is stress or not. And so there is a daily rhythm of the cortisol hormone concentration in our bloodstream. It is high in the mornings and then gradually it goes down and it is at its lowest at night. There is a reason for this. When cortisol is higher in the mornings, it gives us a burst of energy. It gives us energy, it heightens our state of alertness, which is great because during the day we are not nocturnal, we are diurnal animals. So we get up in the morning and then we get to work, we do stuff. So we need to be recharged and energized, and as the cortisol level goes down by the time the night arrives, we are tired by then, and then we can get to sleep. However, this changes. If you have chronic stress, this whole situation changes because now our system is overloaded with cortisol, because cortisol creates other effects too. It is required for the emergency response, so that the concentration is higher, and so when night comes along, this high level of cortisol does not let us sleep easily, because it heightens awareness, and we are sort of wired when we are tired at night and we don't get good sleep. And this has implications, because if chronic sleep deprivation can have extremely harmful effects on our body. We are perpetually in a state of fatigue, and our effectiveness is not very good, and it starts impacting our organ systems. So that is number one, a very important harmful effect of chronic stress response. The second harmful effect is on the cardiovascular system. Now, the cardiovascular system is our heart and the arteries, veins, and capillaries which provide blood circulation in our body. During a period of stress response, again going back to the deer, when you need a burst of energy to fight or flight, more glucose needs to be pumped into the bloodstream, and more blood needs to be sent to the large, the blood needs to be sent faster to the large body muscles, so that more oxygen and glucose can be supplied to them. This is accomplished by two primary ways by our cardiovascular system. The first thing that happens is that the heart beats faster. The heart rate goes up. The second thing that happens is that the blood is pumped with greater force, which means that the blood pressure goes up. So with the blood pressure going up and the blood being pumped faster, the goal that we need to accomplish in a physical emergency is accomplished. However, think of our cardiovascular system as a pump. The heart is essentially a pump, a muscular pump, and the blood vessels are complex pipes. So think about a pump and a set of pipes. If you overwork that system, it is actually going to wear out faster, and that is what happens to our cardiovascular system. When the blood pressure goes up, and you get this chronic hypertension, our arteries start becoming more muscular in order to deal with that high blood pressure, and therefore they become less flexible. Also, because of the higher blood pressure, what happens is that in the smaller blood vessels, where the blood is thudding through them at greater force, some injuries at junctions of those blood vessels develop. And when those injuries develop, the natural response of our body is inflammation. Inflammation is a response in order to heal injured body parts. And then, some white blood cells will go and collect in that area, and so on. So there's some stuff that happens in that area. And as a result, so you all have heard of cholesterol. If in those kinds of situations, cholesterol can start accumulating in those areas as crud. And when these happens, this is called plaque formation. When plaque formation starts happening in our arteries, it is a condition known as atherosclerosis, which means the narrowing of the arteries because of plaque formation, which makes blood supply less to important body muscles. When this kind of a thing happens to arteries that supply blood, which is glucose and oxygen, to the muscles of the heart and to the brain, well, the heart, you can get a heart attack if not enough oxygen and blood goes to the heart muscles and they are not able to pump enough blood to the body. Similarly, If the arteries and capillaries supplying to the brain get narrow and blood supply is blocked, you can get a stroke. These are very, very severe conditions that can even become fatal. And this is how chronic stress response actually can aggravate cardiovascular disease. Now, the third bad thing that happens as a result of chronic stress response is that our reproductive system does not function as well. During stress response, the secretion of, for example, in males, the secretion of the testosterone hormone greatly goes down. Now, when that happens, the the formation of sperm and the sexual activity in males is affected. Similarly, in women, the same thing happens. The hormonal secretion of important hormones is impacted, and therefore that creates reproductive problems. More and more research has shown that now infertility problems are on the rise amongst the younger population, and a lot of this has to do with this chronic stress response. The fourth thing that is affected by our chronic stress response is our immune system. Our immune system is adversely affected by chronic stress response, and what happens is that we can then catch diseases more easily, which means that we become susceptible to even common diseases, and when we get a disease, our body is not able to fight it as effectively, and therefore we may stay sicker for longer periods of time. And the fifth and final thing that I want to talk about today, the harmful effect of a chronic stress response, is diabetes. During chronic stress response, particularly with people who are overweight, our body cells start to become resistant to insulin. Now, insulin is another hormone which is secreted by our pancreas, and it helps to deal with excess glucose in our bloodstream. So, it helps to convert excess glucose in our bloodstream into fat or glycogen, which is then stored in our cells for future use. This is very important because excess glucose in our bloodstream again can have very harmful effects. When our cells become resistant to insulin as a result of chronic stress is a contributor. It's not the only reason why they become insulin resistant, but it is a contributor. It may hasten this effect. What happens is that then insulin conversion into glycogen and fat does not happen, and we develop the condition known as type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes, if not managed properly, can be extremely harmful. You can read about the harmful effects of type 2 diabetes. It's one of those conditions that's very, very hard to reverse, and once you get it, then managing it over a lifetime can become a challenge. So that is another potential outcome of chronic stress response in our bodies. Now, all of these things, I talked about the 5 effects. There are actually many more, but I talked about the 5 main ones. It's quite a handful, right? And that is why we can call stress the silent killer. All of these impacts are happening inside our body. None of them creates a problem overnight suddenly, but it builds up, and all of these effects start to degrade our body, degrade our organ systems, which lead to these kinds of serious diseases and serious conditions that can sometimes even be fatal. So it's really important to figure out how to deal with this, and that is what I'm going to do in part 3. In part 3, I'm going to talk about what can we do. We have to work, we have to live in this world. So what do we do? How do we tailor our attitudes, and how do we develop some skills in order to deal with this, so that the effects of chronic stress, so number one, we reduce the stress that we experience, and number two, when we experience stress, how do we deal with it so that we can at least minimize or completely switch off the effects of the chronic stress response. That will be the topic of my third episode in this series. So I hope this was helpful, and stay tuned for another edition of Career Magic.